Good morning, Simon, and thank you for joining us to talk about your role and experience with Truro Foodbank. This information session is part of our Bitesize CMD series to explore how current affairs events are having an impact in Truro Diocese. So to begin with, could you tell us, Simon, a bit about how long you've been involved with the food bank and how you've seen the need change during that time?
Yep, certainly, Rebecca. So I started in Truro Foodbank in the July of 2019. At that time, we were feeding in Truro Foodbank about 2,800 people a year. Because we keep a voucher system and we keep records of who comes in, then we can track changes, we can see what is happening with demand. So in the first year of COVID, when there was all this confusion and people didn't know what was happening to their jobs and supply lines were cut, etc., that went up to 3,600 people fed in the financial year that year. And I think people thought that was the high point. They thought, oh, if we've survived COVID, then, maybe things will change. But unfortunately, and then along comes the cost of living crisis. And for this financial year, we're now on track to be feeding 4,400 people. So it is a very significant increase in demand, I'm afraid.
Really, really shocking, isn't it? And you've touched there already on the increase in the cost of living and the crisis that we're hearing about quite a lot. Have you seen that beginning to impact already? And what are the concerns that you have as the crisis deepens?
Each time something comes along which increases demand, it brings in different families or different people that perhaps weren't affected before. So, for example, when the petrol prices went up, what we started to see was people coming in whose job involved a fair amount of travel. So, for example, care workers, they might have 8 or 9 different clients or patients to go and see in a day, and their agency or employer would not pay any increased fuel allowances. So therefore, that comes out of what you have to live on. And if you are on fine margins, then that affects you. So that was an impact that we saw, for example, with the fuel one. Now we're into the energy crisis and the costs of gas and electric. That again is now bringing in different people that never thought in a million years they would be coming into a food bank. So we are seeing a lot more families and new customers. We never try to have long-standing customers, if you like. It's meant to be helping people in food crisis, and a crisis is meant to be a short-term situation. So when I started, the Trussell Trust guidance, and it was only guidance, was that crisis meant 3 lots of emergency food help in a 6-month period. Now that could be 3 consecutive weeks, or it could be spaced out. What we're finding now is that 3 parcels is nowhere near good enough. So we're having people that receive 8, 9, 10 lots of help in that sort of period. And I do keep tabs with other food banks to make sure we are acting consistently. And the food banks that I talk to, whether Trussell Trust or independent, are saying the same things. So the impacts that we're seeing is not just the range of people affected, it's also how long they need help for before they can actually see a way of getting out of the crisis.
Yeah, okay. And what's your greatest concern as the crisis deepens?
That more and more people will be brought in. So, for example, each food bank has its own demographic areas. And the ones in Truro, we cover from Perranporth, Porthtowan, all the way down to St Maur. So it is coast to coast mid-Cornwall. It's not just the city centre of Truro. But the demographics in our area are different to the demographics in Penzance, the demographics in Cambourne, Poole, Bude, Liskeard, wherever you want to look. Each will have its different pressures. I would suggest that Truro has not historically been thought of as being an area where there would be a lot of food poverty. But given those numbers that I started with, and the fact that we're looking at something like a 3/4 increase perhaps in terms of demand from a couple of years ago, then it is totally true that people coming in are new customers, and more of them have jobs. So whereas perhaps before there was the belief or stereotype that this is something that affects homeless people or people on benefits, more and more it's in-work poverty that we are seeing. So we're feeding police community support officers, nurses, teaching staff, taxi drivers, post office workers, some small self-employed business people, hospitality people, you name it. So there is a hard choice going on out there now for employers about how they basically treat their staff. We're seeing with some customers a return to the cash in hand under the table approach, so that employers can avoid contracts, national insurance, and therefore that person's not getting those payments made. They're not getting any pension payments made. We're seeing more people come to us with 0 hours contracts. So when you see a government figure that says we have record employment, I can't contest that. I have no idea if that's right or not. But from our experience on the ground, a job with a 0 hours contract is not a job with a guaranteed salary. It is very hard to try to budget for a rent or for a mortgage if you have no idea from week to week or month to month how much income you're going to have and how many shifts are going to be cancelled at short notice. And that is affecting a number of people coming to us. The other impact from that, of course, is this isn't just about food and trying to keep a house over your head. It's also about mental health. Because if you are faced with that anxiety on a daily or weekly basis, have I got enough to provide food? Have I got enough money to heat the house? Have I got enough money to keep the house? Then that must be and is having an effect on people's mental health. So if you're asking how is it looking going forward, I would say it's going to take a long time to get all of that resolved. This isn't some sort of short-term fix that's going to happen here.
No, it's really traumatic for people, absolutely. Are you seeing that you have enough supplies for people? Because obviously if more and more people are using food banks, then perhaps they're not obviously not donating to them in the same way that people might have done in the past.
Well, we're recording this in September, Rebecca, and at the moment the donations are less than they used to be, which, if you can see demand going up, is obviously not a good equation to have. I would estimate that possibly quite a few people that were able to donate food in the past are now not in a secure enough position themselves to be able to do so. However, we must also look for the positives, and a big thank you to all the organisations that do offer support. It might be wrong to pick one or two out, but Carn Downs Church have given us a donation, and a harvest festival. Truro Bowling Club raised £510, and we did a supermarket shop with them the other day, and that brought in nearly 300 kilos of stock. So there are very generous people and very generous organisations out there that help. So what that means is if we don't get the same amount of donated food in the drop bins in the supermarkets, then we have to go out and buy it, which we have at the moment the resources to do. But just as one indicator, a couple of weeks ago, the supermarket drop bins were very low. It was about 150 kilos that came in and over a ton went out. We have at the moment, as I'm talking to you, about 6.5 tons in stock. So if that was to continue, then you can see it wouldn't be very long before we would be in a very difficult situation. Now, that was an extreme week, I must admit. And certainly the things like the two donations that I've mentioned will certainly help, and we can replenish the stocks a little bit. I think it will be telling to see what happens at harvest, because in the previous 3 years that I've worked here, then Harvest Festival, roughly from sort of mid-September to end of October, roughly the Harvest Festival collected from churches and schools has brought in about 5 tons of food, which is excellent. That's about a month's worth. We're giving out about 5.5 tons of food a month now. Yeah. We will see whether or not Harvest produces that again, because, you know, again, it can be very difficult for people at the moment, and we certainly would not want people to be giving their children food to bring into a Harvest Festival if they are struggling for food themselves. So yes, we have some stock, we have the resources to be able to go and buy stock, but that you just can't keep buying and supplying more and more. There's got to be a bigger fix than that.
Yeah, a real challenge. Yeah. So it's really easy for us to hear of people as being statistics or numbers and talk about in terms of that. We don't necessarily get to feel what the actual need is. I just wondered if there's a particular story that you've experienced that has impacted you or stood out to you that you would be able to share with us.
Well, I'll give you a few, but I'll do a couple. One is one which reflects the current situation, and also a positive one, because we've got to have a positive focus as well. So the one that reflects the current situation, I can think of, we had a family of 4 come into us as a new family. Before COVID, both the mother and the father had jobs in hospitality, and they had no debts whatsoever. They were able to cope. COVID comes along, they lose both their jobs, made redundant, that's it. So they went on to Universal Credit, and Universal Credit have come to the point of saying, right, if you don't get employment, then your benefits will be affected. So they now, again, both have jobs, but they are, again, 0-hour contract jobs, cleaning jobs. So they do not know from week to week what they're going to have. Income security is a massive problem, and they are now over £1,000 in debt and needing to come to Foodbank. So as just one snapshot example of what the last couple of years have done to people, that is an example of what is happening. The good thing about that, if there is a good thing, is that they have actually come in and spoken to us and received help, and we've been able to put them in touch with advice agencies. There are a number of families that are similarly struggling, who maybe for reasons of pride or perceptions of stigma of coming into a recognised food bank actually don't. So the really worrying thing, Rebecca, is that demand could be even greater than what we are actually experiencing. So one thing I would use this opportunity to say is, if you do know of any family that is in need of food assistance or advice about their circumstances, please do encourage them to seek help, either from a food bank or citizens advice or some organisation that can help them before their situation actually deteriorates worse and becomes a real crisis. The positive example I'll give you is, when I started, there was a young lady, young mum with a 2-year-old child, single parent, and we took her food on a couple of occasions. She was adamant, although she lived miles from the food bank, she was going to walk with the buggy and come and collect food. So I could see there was a determination in this girl. She wanted to get something resolved. And she said to me at the time, I'm going to start my own business. I'm going to get myself out of this situation. Okay, so after feeding her maybe 3-4 times, something like that, I didn't see her for, oh crikey, I'll probably say 1.5 years. Bumped into a shop the other day, and she said, "Oh, you're the bloke from the food bank, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, hello, I remember you." She said, "I started my business. I'm now getting £1,500, £2,000 a month, and I won't be needing to come back to food bank. And when I've got a little bit behind me, I'm going to give you something as a thank you for when you were there for me." So that, as a positive example, is important, because, as I say, people do need to see that there is a way out of this current crisis and this current situation.
Yeah.
Some of it depends on the individual personal approach and their skills and abilities. Some of it depends, of course, on the structures and the way that things are in place that can either help or not.
That's a lovely story to hear, and it is so important, isn't it, for people to just try and seek help and to be signposted to the right place, because often it is out there, but it's about being able to find it and access it. And if there are organisations that can help people with that, then that can be really beneficial to people.
Yep, absolutely.
So are there ways in which you'd encourage people that are listening to this or watching this to provide support?
Yes, absolutely. My personal belief is that if we're going to do something about food crisis, then the three realms that need to come together and collaborate are the political realm, the business realm, and the social realm. So the political side of things is covered by Cornwall councillors and MPs. So one thing that individuals or organisations could do is to ask their local councillor or MP, what is your awareness of food need, food poverty in your area, in your constituency? And what policies are you supporting? And what is your voting record like on issues that affect poverty? Awareness raising is one thing. You can bring information, you can use the figures that I gave you earlier. Making people aware of things that maybe they're genuinely not aware of is one thing. But the second part of that is action. It's not enough just to say, oh, I'm aware of the situation. The question is, well, what then do you do about it? So for people in the political realm, there are some excellent examples of councillors who get involved with their individual constituents, sort out their problems, advocate on their behalf, and get things resolved. Maybe, for example, if we're talking about what to do if you're threatened with eviction, what to do if a benefits decision or a discretionary decision has been made that's created a difficulty, or if something's taken too long, a delay in payments. So councillors can advocate for individuals. Councillors can also create policies that could help or hinder the recovery and people's ability to be able to look after themselves. So that's the political side. Get involved with your councillor, write to them, ask them, what do you know? What are you doing? When's the last time your councillor saw somebody, went to a food bank and asked them what's going on here, for example? The business side, it is very difficult at the moment for small businesses. I was a small business. I still have a small amount of work that I still do, but COVID made a big impact to me, and that will be the same now with the cost of living and energy prices for businesses. I understand that, but there are some businesses that have chosen well before these measures, these impacts, to use and abuse 0 hours contracts, for example, or short notice shift cancellations. So I can totally understand there might be a circumstance where for both the business and the employee, it is beneficial to have a 0 hours contract. You might have a retired person on a very good pension who does not want to be tied down to 25 hours a week contract. I get that. But when you see jobs advertised or these things are imposed, what happens is exactly what I mentioned before. Loss of secure income, mental health and anxiety about, I've got to pay a rent, I don't know how much money I'm going to get. So at Truro Foodbank, we have signed up to the Good Business Charter. If you or anybody wants to look under the Federation of Small Businesses, their campaigns section, you will see a lot of information about the Good Business Charter. It has 10 commitments that you must sign up to and keep to. Those include paying the living wage, the true living wage, treating staff fairly, being transparent with tax, and then you've got things like recycling and commitment to the environment, those sort of things. There are other standards out there. There's another thing called B Corp, which also includes elements about fair pay and treatment, but is more about sustainability and environment. So we're encouraging organisations to sign up and commit to a charter that guarantees they will pay fairly and treat staff fairly, even in this tough economic climate. And that way we might be able to get some assistance to people that are in work poverty. So that's the two aspects there. The social one, well, that's covered by organisations like the Cornwall Independent Poverty Forum, which campaigns for issues about poverty. So again, another aspect to do would be have a look at the Poverty Forum, see what they're campaigning for, and if you want to support them, then join in actions or events that will help with that.
Lovely. Yeah, it's so important, isn't it? Not just to be donating, but to actually try and change the structures that are creating this crisis for people in the first place, as well as donating food for those crisis points. So, yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Simon. I really appreciate the insight that you've given us, and hope that we'll be able to support you and other food banks as you move forward and as we get through this time. So thank you for your time.
Lovely. Thanks, Rebecca. Take care.